Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome EFI's Chief Operating Officer, Marc Olin.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to Connect again, and it's my distinct honor this year to introduce you to Al Zollar, who is one of our executive partners from Cirrus, and I think you'll enjoy the session we have, and I know I've enjoyed getting to know Al over the last year, and I'm sure all of you will as well. Thanks,
Mark.
Al.
Thanks. Hello, everyone.
Thanks, Al. So just don't get too close to the fire.
Yeah.
Al, it's a pleasure having you here at the conference. Can you provide a little insight into your personal background?
Well, sure, be glad to do that. I'll start with the beginning because it's a little bit relevant to some current events. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. I then moved in high school to the San Francisco Bay Area. I currently live in New York, but to remove any doubt, go Chiefs! For those of you from outside the U.S. and that doesn't mean much to you, I apologize.
You're not wearing red, Al.
I'm not wearing red. But I then, after getting out of college, went right to IBM back in 1977. I had two sort of careers at IBM. One was really as a technical salesperson, SE, and then I moved into our products businesses where I had increasing responsibilities for products. I left IBM in 2011, and the job I left was general manager of a division called Tivoli Software, about a $3 billion systems management, security management, storage management business. And then before that, I managed a business that some of you might still be using the products of, the AS400 I-Series. That was really my only hardware experience, and I think it demonstrated to IBM that, in fact, I am a software guy. Before that, I ran Lotus Software. So some of you may remember a product, Lotus Notes, and Lotus 123 had the responsibility to really integrate that acquisition into IBM. It was bought in 1995. We didn't integrate it until 2000 when I came along. I also had my first experience as a public company board member. I joined a company called Chubb Insurance. It's still around. I'd left that board in 2016. Then I left IBM in 2011, I took a nice little break. I went to Harvard and spent a year as a Harvard fellow in a program they called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. And that was a way to just sort of refocus and recommit yourself. And I learned a lot, studied a lot about education and early childhood development and learning. I also started to do some angel investing, and in fact, I think I mentioned to you, I got involved with one of the Pittsburgh companies, Carnegie Speech. And what I learned from angel investing is that I was much better with more established, developed technologies and businesses than I was with startups. And so I decided to switch my early stage investing to being a limited partner investing in venture capital funds, which I still do. And that's about the time that Cirrus came along and said, we're interested in bringing you on board as a operating partner. Private equity firms are made up of people who are financial folks, investment professionals, typically from investment banks, and operating people who, like my colleague Michael Seidman, who's probably out here somewhere, have, in the case of Cirrus, had decades of operating experiences in tech companies. So it's 6 years with Cirrus now, and in addition to that, I've done some other public company boards. I am on the board of Public Service Enterprise Group, which is the public utility and energy provider for mid-New Jersey. I joined the board of Red Hat Software a year before IBM showed up with a $34 billion check. That was an interesting experience. And I just recently joined the boards of the NASDAQ and Bank of New York Mellon.
Is it true that IBM bought Red Hat to get you back? Was that the...
No, there's absolutely no truth to that. That's a very interesting deal, though.
Yeah, yeah. So, you mentioned you started in the technology industry in the 1970s, and
Yep.
I think people often say that there's been more technology change between the 1970s and today than there has been in the last 2,000 years combined, because of the combination of personal computer, internet, and all the many, many other innovative ideas that have come to market. So, having that view of being there at the kind of the start of this technology revolution, what do you see as the most significant innovation over that time frame?
Yeah, it's easy for us to point to things. We could point to, in the current time frame, 5G, blockchain. In the past, we could point to things like relational databases or the router. But I think I would answer that question from the perspective of two, I almost call them movements. One is the open source software movement, because it has really unleashed a pace of innovation that we have never seen before. I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina when Red Hat was founded there, and that I got to know them. I've known that company for a long time. And at the time we thought, open source, this is, be interesting for an operating system, but we had no idea that, the major innovations, especially driven by the mega scale cloud providers and social media platforms, would all be based on open source software. And so if you look at things like, Kubernetes and Docker and these kinds of things that are foundations for modern applications, they all started as open source projects inside these mega scale companies. So that would be the first one. The second one would be the pervasiveness of compute, networking, and storage capabilities, such that almost any piece of equipment or anything we carry around or anything in between is a communicating computer. And the opportunities that creates, and especially as it relates to changing the experience of our customers. Because again, we all carry these devices, we can marshal data relative to what the customer's wants and needs are and how they can be best served as a result of the pervasiveness of these technologies. And so I would say those two movements, open source software, the pervasiveness of compute, IoT, social, mobility, et cetera, all those things would be the most significant.
Very interesting. And during that time frame that we mentioned, IBM as a company went through such a huge transformation, and you were there kind of during that. And I think while it's certainly a completely different industry than what everybody here is in today, it still is an interesting paradigm for how they dealt with the demise of the mainframe and transformed the company from where it was in the 1970s, known for kind of mainframe computing and big enterprise computing, to the changes in the 1990s and 2000s to where they are today. So, describe for us a little bit about how IBM went through that transformation, how they were able to survive and thrive through that huge change that they went through.
Well, again, as I said, I joined IBM in 1977. I know there's some of you in here that weren't born in 1977, but I joined IBM in 1977, and the mainframe was, it was the beginning of the heyday of mainframe computing. And IBM had become so successful, some of you may not recall that there were several suppliers of mainframe computing just a decade before that. They used to be called the Bunch: Burroughs, Univac, NCR, Control Data, and Honeywell. And nobody remembers them as providers of mainframe computing. And the success that IBM had during that era, extending into the late 80s, really had the effect of creating an arrogance at IBM, such that we call it the field of dreams phenomenon. If we build it, customers are going to come. And it really is a cautionary tale for any business that starts to become very successful, as we're starting to see again some of these mega scale companies. But to me, the most important change at IBM happened when we decided for the first time to bring an outsider in as CEO, a guy named Lou Gerstner, who came in 1993. And he had been CEO of American Express and RJR Nabisco, and had been a big consumer of IBM technologies and had great respect for the people at IBM. But when he got to the company, I was at one of his first senior manager meetings, and he said, this was really strange coming into IBM, because it was like coming to a team that had world-class athletes in every position. The game is out there on the field, and they're in the locker room fighting. And so the thing that he did to turn that around was really begin a whole series of activities that fundamentally flipped us from an inside-out thinking to outside-in thinking about customers, innovating with customers, co-creating with customers, as well as understanding markets and technology trends, and putting that all together as a way to really inform the solutions that we brought to market. So, Lou was, he saved IBM. IBM, people don't know that IBM, before Gerstner came in, was dangerously close to not making payroll. And he turned all that around.
Well, that's quite a story there, and I'm sure that must have been some interesting times to live through that and see how that transformation happened. So around that time, I guess a little bit maybe after that, you were running Lotus, as you mentioned before, and had both Lotus 123, Lotus Notes under your domain, and so things changed quite a bit from the 1990s, but you have a lot of the benefit of hindsight now, and if you could go back to the younger Al, what would you tell him about how we should do things differently as it relates to Lotus? What would you have done differently?
See, we have a couple hours to have this discussion, right? You guys, you're not interested in cocktails or anything, right? There's so many things, but if there's, well, first off, one, I wish I could have changed, but I'm not so sure that there was any way to change it, and that was if anybody remembers using Lotus 123 and where it was vis-a-vis Microsoft Excel as a spreadsheet at that time, it really was generally regarded as best of breed, but it got crushed by Microsoft because of the power of the preload distribution model, which, by the way, IBM actually had to convince Bill Gates was a good idea, because he thought if he preloaded software onto IBM PCs that he would lose touch with the end customer. You may recall then that there were these places like Egghead Software where you could actually go and buy the operating system. But
my parents used to run a software city.
Yep, well, there you go. Probably crushed Egghead.
Yeah.
But at any rate, that preload distribution model was really one of the things that did Lotus 123 in. But Lotus, and that was actually before IBM acquired it, pivoted toward this new category called groupware collaboration, and delivered this breakthrough product in the late 80s, early 90s called Lotus Notes. And if there's one thing I could go back and do differently, because that was the reason IBM bought Lotus, was principally because of Lotus Notes. If there's one thing I could go back and do differently, I would have fought harder to get the R&D investments to re-architect it. And then we would have had to, because it was a client-server technology that was built with the client-server technologies of that era, and the internet was just starting to happen. We should have re-architected it around internet technologies, and of course we would have had to re-architect it again around the cloud technologies. And I had a proposal to do that, but I didn't fight as hard as I should have for it inside of IBM. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Okay, so coming from that, now that you have all those many years of wisdom, we have out in the audience here many people from different types of businesses, but all relating to the let's say one way or the other printing or packaging industry in some form. There's a lot of family-owned businesses here, but also large enterprises here. And so if you were to give them kind of one piece of advice on how to stay current on technology and what they can do to better prepare themselves for the future in technology, what would that be?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier. I think we have the opportunity with technologies, and again, you can see this within the family of EFI offerings, the opportunity to alter the experience that you have with your customer in dramatic ways. The best example I can give of this is one that we're probably, most of us are familiar with. For me, it was the first time I went into an Apple store to buy an iPhone versus, getting it any other way. And the person came up to me with the checkout device that was, a modified iPhone. So there was no queues, swipe your credit card, go, email, receipt. That customer experience compared to the customer experience and trying to guess which queue was going to move the fastest and always guessing wrong and being frustrated and ultimately saying, I'm going to leave, came from an intense focus that Steve Jobs had and has, really his, I think, largest innovation beyond the technology around trying to simplify the experience of people who are trading their, consideration for your products. So with the technologies we have today, whether it's the mobile devices, the ability to simplify workflows and integrate communications across things like our eFlow Automator, these technologies are really critical to simplifying the customer experience. And so obviously none of us have the kind of investment capacity that somebody like Apple has, but you can get better at giving your customers a better experience every day. And that's what I would really challenge all of our customers to do.
Okay, and you mentioned some of our, thanks for the pitch, by the way, mentioned some of our software applications there. You are still on the board of Red Hat.
No.
Right, not since IBM bought it.
Yeah, IBM bought them, that board was dissolved.
So you're not in any advisory capacity there at all anymore?
I give them free advice, but they don't pay me for it now.
Okay, so, but as you said, one of the open source pioneers.
Yep.
And so over the next decade, since we're now officially in a new decade, and we can talk about that, so 10 years from now, how do you think the landscape is going to look on open source versus paid software applications and the difference between those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When the open source software movement started again in the late 90s, Linus Torvalds and Linux being really the first sort of major item, we studied it very carefully at IBM and concluded incorrectly that nobody will ever make money at this. So we saw it as a way to, quite frankly, challenge Microsoft and Sun, who were dominant, in the operating system layer at that time. So having Linux as another alternative, seemed like a good idea. And so we put our, efforts behind it, contributed a lot of technology to it. But we never saw it going, we didn't have the vision quite to see it going past the operating system layer. And what I think has happened is it has really taken over the infrastructure layer within the system. So operating systems, databases, application servers, now orchestration and management. Not quite yet security. Security has a few open source components. But I think the reason for that really comes to the reason why I think there will always be a role for the proprietary model of development. I think it's about applications. And the reason for that is that the kind of expertise you need to solve the use cases that are solved by, our productivity suite or Fiery or even the press software that we have within our machines are much narrower, sort of use cases compared to, databases. Yeah. And so the only way that companies can be rewarded for that innovation, I think, is in a licensed software model, proprietary software model. So I think there will be a layer of applications, especially those really highly specialized. I mean, look at something like iQuote, really, incredible algorithms and insight has to go into the building of that software. It's hard for me to see that being done successfully in an open source model.
So let's change pace for a minute here, and let's go back to another stage of your life.
Are you trying to make me feel old here, Mark? Well, it's because I am old.
We don't need to talk about that any further. So during your Cirrus, the journey that led you to Cirrus,
yep.
And probably a lot of people in the audience have done a little bit of research on Cirrus since the acquisition was announced. And
who are these guys?
Right. Who the heck are these guys, and what do they know about printing? Can you say, give us your perspective. Why did you decide to join that group? I'm sure there were, many private equity firms you could have, with the experience you have, that you could have gone to. So why Cirrus? Why did you choose them? And what do you, from what you have seen, what do you think their strategic objectives of the group are overall?
Yeah, so Cirrus is, again, a private equity firm, about $6 billion of assets under management that we use to invest in mostly taking public companies private, focused on technology, and really we view EFI as an industrial technology provider. The reason that I was attracted to Cirrus once I got to know them, well, first off, there's a little sidebar. My wife is with a firm called Neuberger Berman, and they invest in private equity funds. And we got married while I was still at IBM, and she would chirp in my ear about private equity, and I'd be like, yeah. I mean, I really didn't focus that much on it. But her firm became an investor in Cirrus, and then a guy who had worked at IBM with me went there, and he reached out to me and said, you should come talk to these guys. And I found when I sat with them that the thing that attracted me is their deep appreciation of what I call the technology life cycle. Every bit of technology that we've ever seen, become pervasive across our lives started with, a dream or a vision of some entrepreneur. That entrepreneur fought, struggled, got funded. The company maybe got taken public, or the technology got, subsumed into a larger company. More and more customers use the technology. As a public company, it's a high-flying growth company. Everybody loves the stock. They're darlings. They're in the covers of magazines. But as they succeed, what happens across that technology life cycle? Growth slows because, it's a denominator phenomenon, right? And the public markets say, well, you're not as valuable as you used to be, so we think your stock's worth less. But the management teams typically understand that, okay, we see that phase of growth, falling off. Here's the next phase of growth. But the public markets, are typically saying, just give us our money back in dividends or stock buybacks. And so those are companies that are ideal to be in a private setting where the operating experience that we bring with our executive partners from Cirrus, combined with our investment professionals, allows us to really go deep and appreciate how to unlock value. So, again, as we look at EFI and we look at this analog to digital transformation and this explosion of colorful images that are associated with brands, the ability to provide solutions across productivity software, Fiery, and our inkjet product lines is a tremendous opportunity. We're like in the first mile of a marathon, and our ability to really take advantage and monetize on the behalf of, well, first off, serve customers, but also serve our investors in a positive way is what really gets me excited about the work we do at Cirrus.
Very good. And as part of that work at Cirrus, you are kind of our resident guru now, I think, on the software side. Guru. I think, I can call you our software guru. And so as part of that, you've been spending a lot of quality time with Gabby and the rest of the team.
Does he call it quality time?
Yeah, he always calls it quality
time. Okay, good.
Time.
Just checking.
Yes. I'll take the $10 later, Gabby. And so as part of that, I think you've gotten to know our applications very well. What do you see as the core strengths of the software applications at EFI, and what are some areas where you think we should be investing more or improving upon in the future?
Well, I get very excited about where the EFI technologies are in general, and especially within productivity software. And it kind of goes back to the statement I made about Lotus Notes. We've got some very solid solutions in the segments, print, packaging, corrugated, textile. We've got some very exciting capabilities, and these have been assembled through a series of acquisitions, many of which you executed when you ran the business. And the kind of value that we can deliver to our customers is just astounding. But in order for us to keep that relevant, accelerate the pace of it, we have to be focused on modernizing these capabilities. We have to be focused on evolving the Radius technology so that it's not tied to legacy infrastructure that will hold it back in terms of the rate and pace of innovation. We've got to continue to be in a position to take advantage of the cloud. We have to take advantage of the great work that Toby's doing with IQ. So I think there's an agenda of moving along a roadmap toward the most modern architectures that we have today, which are based on the principles of microservices and containers, and not necessarily throwing everything into the cloud, because it's not clear that that's what's wanted or needed by our customers, but being in a position to have customers deploy our software and use our software in ways that suit their business models. That also gives us the opportunity to expand geographically. We have incredible market presence. We get the opportunity to serve great customers in North America and Western Europe, but when we look at Asia, the opportunities to serve more customers and grow our business are really right in front of us. And we have to think about different ways of going to those kinds of markets, different kinds of ecosystems and partnerships. And so it's been really exciting for me to engage a lot of time with Gabby, but also with the overall executive team at EFI, and figuring out how to do that in a way that makes sense and fits the overall financial model.
So thanks, Al. And one of the other organizations I think you're a member of from the biography I saw is this Executive Leadership Council. And of course, you had the many years of IBM, and you couldn't have done that without having some great leadership traits that led you through those various different positions there. So what do you see as the few key traits that exemplify leadership qualities from your time at that, and maybe share a little bit about the Executive Leadership Council. Tell us what that's about.
Be happy to do that. Well, the first thing, I'll talk about the Executive Leadership Council. It's an interesting organization. Back in 1986, there were 19 black executives in Fortune 500 companies who came together and said, it might help us to talk to each other because we're probably dealing with some similar issues. And so they founded the Executive Leadership Council, and the requirement was you needed to be in the C-suite or one level below the C-suite. Fast forward to today, there's more than 1,000 people that fit that criteria. The organization is about 250. Not enough, but it's focused on really enhancing opportunities for African Americans in Fortune 500. And so the leadership abilities and leadership development is one of the things that organization focuses on, especially with kind of the pipeline, the next generation of executives. But for me, leadership, I'm always a little hesitant to use sports analogies. If you couldn't tell by my Go Chiefs yell, I'm a big sports fan. So if sports analogies offend anyone in the audience, I apologize in advance. But I love basketball. In the sport of basketball, there's a position called point guard. And the point guards, the best ones have been guys like Magic Johnson, John Stockton, maybe more contemporary Steph Curry. And they have a job of really orchestrating the performance of the team. The Magic Johnson, to me, was the best at this. He was good at getting the ball to the scorers on the team in the best position for them to score to allow them to win the game. That's the way I try to imagine my leadership. It's about really enabling teams to win. If you score points, that's great, but if the team is relying on you all the time to score points, again, to stay in the basketball analogy, at the latter part of his career, maybe Kobe Bryant, he scored all the points, but they didn't win. But that point guard is responsible for really getting the ball to people on the team so they can score. So I've always been about, and that's what generates followership, because if you have leadership with no followership, you have a limited leadership runway.
Yeah.
So that's the way I think about it.
That's interesting. And so going back to IBM again, that you were at since the 1970s. So
I did say I was 12 when I started there,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I thought 13, but okay. Yeah. So with all the different things that you saw there, all the different products that you went through, there had to be some things that stood out as kind of your proudest moments at the company, as kind of achievements that you look back on and say, geez, well, that was really kind of the best thing that I did in that decade, or during the time there. So what are some of those big victories that you can talk about at IBM?
Well, one that went back a number of years that I was really very proud of, involved when I was the product manager and engineering manager for a product we had called DB2. It's a relational database, the IBM premier relational database product. And when I took over the group, they had been working on a new release of DB2 for 4 years. You think about that, especially in today's the rate and pace that we move in. We had this product under development in the lab for 4 years. And when we finally delivered it, it was one of our poorest quality products in terms of the amount of bugs that escaped our development processes and customers unfortunately found. And so as we took that input in and thought about how we would build the next release of the product, we decided that we weren't going to let that happen again, that we were going to obviously have a shorter development cycle, but really focus on quality, because DB2 at the time was running huge banking systems and manufacturing systems on the mainframe, and really a mission critical product. So we instituted what I called a quality partnership program with an early set of design partner customers. And we put in place a notion that no deliverable, interim deliverable or final deliverable, was complete without a formal customer validation with our design partners. And long story short, we went through that, delivered the product in 18 months, and had the best quality that we ever achieved. And it created a step function jump in terms of the customer acquisition and revenues that we got. So it was a big lesson for me in the importance of quality, especially as it relates to software. Software is becoming so much more pervasive, again, through open source. Most people don't think of this, but open source is a way to actually get more quality because you got more people, more eyeballs on the software. It was really, really informative event. I'd say the second thing that was really the people I got to mentor. I was really proud of the fact that people who rose to very senior levels of the company, including a gentleman who was responsible for driving the vision of the acquisition of Red Hat, were people that I had a chance to mentor or work for me along the way. So I'd say those are two of the things that I'm very proud of. And the last would be that's really where I learned about acquisitions, which really I guess positioned me for the work I do now with Cirrus. We did in my division some really great acquisitions and brought some great technology and people into IBM, and many of whom are still there and still innovating and delivering for IBM. So those are things that make me happy.
Yeah. Very good. So let's pivot a little bit to your personal life now, since we've been covering your decades at IBM. So we just Connect is always a post-holiday event, right out in January, and so everybody's just coming back to work and settling into the new year. So let's talk about what you did. What did you do for the holidays? What's your family holiday tradition?
Well, I've got 5 siblings, one of whom's deceased, 4 who are living, and we're scattered across the United States. So we make a point of gathering in a place. Historically, I had a home in North Carolina, which I've sold. Historically, it would be that home or would be other places. This past holiday, we gathered in Tucson, Arizona for the Christmas holiday, and perfect place for us to all come together and do what we all like to do, whether it's the Canyon Ranch or Miraval Spa that my sisters or wife like, or the golf course that me and my brothers like, or the kids camp that my little 7-year-old and my other little cousins like. Something for everybody. So that's become a tradition that we like a lot, and just because to me, your health, your family, those are the things that allow us to do what we do. And if those things, aren't where they need to be, then our ability to do what all of us do are greatly impacted. So that's what we do.
So so Tucson was a getaway, but is that I'm imagining there are other places you like to go to as well. What's your favorite place to travel to around the planet? Where you like to go most?
Well, actually came to this conference from the Dominican Republic.
Oh.
From Casa de Campo. I don't know how many folks know that. I'm sure you do.
Yes, I was there 2 months ago. So.
Well, yeah, there you go. It is many of you probably know that Mark likes to golf. I hear he's pretty good, but we haven't had a chance to play yet. He's going to have to give me a lot of strokes, I know. But
anyone that played with me earlier this week can definitely attest that you'll probably end up giving me strokes. So.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah.
But the Dominican Republic, I was just there with a guy who's a CEO. He's Dominican, and there's a fabulous estate there, and he was rolled out the red carpet for us. And so every time we go there, we just have a great time, and some of the best golf courses. I like Dye-For. That
You're
is
a Dye-For
one
fan,
of my favorite. The name of the course is Dye-For because the guy who designed it is Pete Dye, D-Y-E, Dye-For, F-O-R-E. Yeah, it's. I guess it didn't really go over that well.
Yeah.
But it's a great golf course.
Yeah.
The other place, though.
He just died, by the way.
Yeah, did he?
Yes, Pete died. Yes.
I didn't see that.
Yes.
Rest in peace. We'll remember him for his great golf courses. The other place that is an incredible place if people have the opportunity to go is Vietnam. There's a resort there called Nam Hai. And it is just an Ernie Els golf course across from it.
Okay, that's someplace I've never been.
Yeah, just incredible hospitality and beauty. Some of the best beaches, the China Beach, which of course was a major part of the war between the United States and Vietnam. It's one of the most beautiful beaches you'll find. So, two favorite places.
Oh, that's great. So yeah, we'll have to compare notes on the Dominican Republic later. So we've established one of your favorite hobbies, which we share in common around golf. But how about other entertainment methods when you're stuck in New York in the snow and there's no golf courses open? What books and or movies do you like?
Well, I'd say my favorite things to do when I'm not working or not golfing would be reading, would be listening to jazz, watch movies. Most of the movies, I have a 7-year-old, as I mentioned, so I'm really up on Frozen 2, and, Sing and Sing 2, and so.
You gonna give us a little, rendition, or?
Let it go, that's it. But books, I read recently, for some reason, I guess it's an obvious reason, I've been reading, books that have to do with the state of our politics and kind of the historic arc of, our democracy in the United States. And a really good one is from the former ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, called Tough Love. And, it's kind of personal, talks about her career, but it also talks about her experiences, including sort of being lit up as a result of the whole Benghazi tragedy. But a very good book, very, very good read. And I finished that one, but I'm reading right now a book called The Killers of the Flower Moon. And it's a book written by a journalist, writes for the New Yorker magazine, and it's about the Osage Native American tribe that was in the sort of Texas-Oklahoma region, and how when oil was discovered under the lands that they had been given through the treaties with the United States, how over time that was taken away and through some fairly brutal techniques. So that's kind of a downer, I guess, to talk about here. But I find these kinds of stories, these kind of real, life stories, interesting and informative of the kinds of things that we all need to be aware of as we look at the environment that we currently find ourselves in.
Okay, well, it is a long-standing tradition, if you didn't figure that out from yesterday's Fireside chat, that we always ask about favorite movies here.
Favorite movies? Well, again, I have to think about that.
There's been some infamous responses on that.
Think about that and eliminate all of the animated movies that come out from Disney.
Frozen cannot be on the list.
We have a tradition in my house of watching every year It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas time. A lot of people probably have that tradition.
Actually, it's a kind of funny coincidence. That was on the TV when it was Christmas time, so not that funny coincidence, but it was on the TV when I was away on vacation with my wife, and I said, "Oh, It's a Wonderful Life." She's like, "What? What movie is that?" She had never heard of it. She had
never seen it.
Never seen the movie, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought everybody had heard of that movie, but anyways, so I'll let you continue. Sorry for the end.
Anybody here who hasn't seen it, go see it, and I'll just tell you right up, I'm that guy that cries at the end of it every time.
Yes.
I mean, I know what's coming.
Yeah.
I still cry.
Yeah.
Other movies that there's one that's a silly movie. It's a really silly movie. Again, it's an old movie. But Dudley Moore, Arthur.
Yeah. Yes.
That movie. I don't know how many of you remember that movie, but that's one that I find entertaining.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Much better responses than we've had in the past to that question. So, any parting words of advice that you want to give to the crowd here, knowing the business everybody's in, and printing and packaging, software users, equipment users, and so on?
Well, the first bit of advice really stems from the fact that while I was at IBM, we had a habit of having most of our customer conferences like this in Las Vegas. And so my advice to you would be that the house always wins. remember that. My second bit of advice would be really, I'll just double down on what I said earlier. We're at a phenomenal time in terms of your ability to focus on your customer success. In fact, I would tell people who worked for me at IBM, the best you can do for your customers is to understand their customers and then try to help them create solutions that bring value to their customers. And so, again, this notion about the experience of customers, every one of us in this room has had a wonderful experience with a product or service and a horrible experience with a product or service. And the capabilities that we now have, including a few that come from this wonderful company, to change that customer experience, you should shoot for superior at all times. Never satisfy yourself, never settle for anything less than shooting for superior. You may not achieve superior customer experience every time, but if that's your goal and that's what you marshal your energy toward and your resources toward, you'll be very successful. So I think those would be my parting shots.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Al. It's great having you here. And
thank you all.
Thank you all for attending.
Oops.